intersection of law and everyday life. We strive to cover it all, help you get your business right. At the corner of legal insight and understanding, we hope to keep your knowledge ever expanding. Welcome to Law Street with GHR. We got law education accessible to all. Oh, welcome to Law Street with GHR. We're informing the community, so come and get involved.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Law Street at the corner of legal insights and understanding. My name is Lisa Rooms and we have with us today Gabrielle Grant Gilpin Hudson.
Hello.
Gabrielle, what are we talking about today?
So today I wanted to touch on a juicy, slightly controversial topic of Airbnbs in gated communities.
Ooh, I know there has been so much in the media, even in the legal sphere, having to do with Airbnbs.
Yeah.
And not only Airbnbs, but generally short-term rentals.
Yeah, so that's what we call them, STRs for short, because I think in Jamaica we love to refer to things as like a particular brand.
Yes.
When that's actually not the technical term for
true.
it. So short-term rentals, one of which platform to do that is Airbnb, but you also have like booking.com, different ones like that.
So run us through some of what's been going on in the media and the legal sphere.
Okay, so I think the first place to start is to say that Airbnbs or short-term rentals, right? They have kind of come about so quickly in modern times that it's one of those areas that has galloped and left behind our legislation locally.
Right.
So technically speaking, if you look at Jamaica's legislation dealing with real estate and legislation dealing with shared communities or legislation dealing with vacation rentals or villas or hotels, we don't really have anything that specifically addresses this instance of short-term rentals in that sense, right?
Okay.
There is a regime that, for example, like villas and hotel operators fall under, but it's still a little bit of a gray area, and then you would have different rules for different gated communities. You have different zoning laws. Is it commercial? Is it not commercial? All of these issues have come up to say, how do we treat with Airbnbs and how do we regulate them? So essentially right now in Jamaica, they're not regulated at all.
Right. But in terms of gated communities, these are regulated, and stratas, these are regulated. Under what kind of legislation is that regulated, and how would that kind of, if it does at all, cover these short-term rentals?
Okay, so what I would say is there are different types of gated communities, right? And what a lot of us will be familiar with are strata properties. So strata properties are real estate developments that fall under the Registration of Strata Titles Act.
Yes.
And they're what people would know overseas as condominiums. So basically it is generally apartments. Apartments have to be included in a development for it to be considered as a strata.
Okay.
Right? And so stratas is a good place to start this discussion in, because every strata under the act has what we call bylaws. Right? And a portion of these bylaws would speak to things that you can change in terms of the rules and the regulations that govern the development, and some things that you can't change because that's just what the law is. Right? So generally speaking, we go back to say, okay, is it a residential or is it a commercial strata?
Right.
Stratas can be both. But one thing that is always in contemplation of a strata is that you shall not do anything that creates a nuisance to your other occupiers of the strata.
Right. So if anything I'm doing is gonna annoy, irritate, or mess with the enjoyment of other people of their property, I should not be doing that.
Correct. So that's one of the first things about strata that you have to take a note of, that even if the strata allows these things to happen, once you're doing anything in a way that constitutes a nuisance to your neighbors, you cannot be doing it in that way. So that's the first thing, that even if the strata allows it. And then I'm going to segue here and say, okay, what do we mean by the strata allowing it? When a development is formed, by the developer, or even after it's formed, you have a executive committee or body of the strata corporation. This is kind of the governance body of the development. It's like we call it the board.
Right.
And essentially they are in charge of calling meetings from time to time, looking at the stratas, bylaws, things like that.
Right. And so they will also enforce the bylaws, or they're
Yes.
supposed to enforce the bylaws.
Correct. And and these bylaws, just to backtrack a bit because it's a technical area of law, are binding on all the owners, right? So once something is in the bylaws, all of the owners are bound by that.
Right.
So what I'm saying is that now what persons do as developers is say, okay, when they're building a development, they will say, this is a development where the bylaws are going to allow you to have short-term rentals, and this is how you do it, and they might have specific rules as to how you operate it, and some of the considerations. How do people check in, check out? What do they do at the security? Is there ID that needs to be left at the gate for the visitors? Things like that. Do you need to maybe pay a little bit more maintenance because it is pulling on the common area more? All of those things will be addressed in the bylaws in some of these newer developments, because now attorneys and developers are learning more to anticipate and plan for these things in setting up a strata.
What happens if I live in a strata that does not speak to this?
Exactly. So now what has happened for already existing stratas is a lot of them have kind of had to say, is this something that we want to allow here or not? And so the owners would call a general, you can either do it at your annual general meeting, or you can call a special meeting for this to consider whether or not you would amend your bylaws to allow or prohibit it. Maybe you allow it in a restricted sense or under certain circumstances, or maybe you prohibit it altogether. A lot of residential communities don't want it because, you know, if it's a family vibe and you have your kids, you maybe don't want
A bunch of
strange
random
people coming in all the time, because
right.
these people tend to be vacationing people, etc., etc. And so what has happened, right, and we'll get into the controversial part of this now, is what has happened is that for stratas where persons have taken the decision that they want to amend their bylaws not to allow it,
right,
it has ruffle the feathers of the persons who want to be able to do it, because
right.
they're like, but this is my property, this is my apartment, I want to use it for this purpose, but now you have all passed a bylaw that is preventing me from using it for the purpose I want to do it.
I mean, but this is one of the risks when you decide that you're going to live in a community.
Exactly, because these things have to go to votes and stuff like that. So what had happened in the legal world, which was quite interesting, was that so there is a provision in the Registration Strata Titles Act that basically speaks to the bylaws not being able to prohibit or restrict the devolution of strata lots,
right,
or any transfer, lease, mortgage, or other dealing therewith.
Right.
So what do all of those words mean?
What did that come down to?
Basically, what some persons were trying to argue is that this provision of the Strata Titles Act that says that you're not allowed to restrict my dealings with my lot means that you can't pass rules in the bylaws that say I can't do Airbnbs.
Right.
And that was challenged in court. And guess what?
Tell me, I want to know.
It never hold up still, right? So
yeah.
there has actually been court cases looking at it, and I don't want to get too nitty-gritty because, you know, this is a light-hearted discussion, but if you want the details, you can check out this article on our website. We'll link it below,
yes,
to get the actual case names and stuff. But in essence, somebody decided to bring this to court, and it went all the way up to the Privy Council, where they were looking at whether or not the particular rule in a strata lot constituted these persons restricting your ability to use and deal with your unit.
Yes.
And basically they said that they had a bylaw that said specifically that the person shall not use the strata lot for any trade, business, and they shall use it for the purpose of a single private residence only. And the court found that, guess what? Residence does not necessarily speak to a specific period of occupation per se, but what it does speak to is the fact that this is your primary place of abode. Its residence is not consistent with something being tourism accommodation,
right,
or accommodation for holidays or other breakaways from your usual settled place of abode.
Right.
And so to the extent that you're allowing persons to use your lot for things that were not a residence, in that circumstance, under those bylaws,
right,
it was a breach of the bylaws.
I don't know.
Right? So that's the situation. So basically what we're seeing is that persons are testing in court whether or not you can restrict these things in your bylaws. And basically, if it's worded properly to be in line with the act, you can restrict these things in your bylaws.
Okay.
Building on that now, okay, so we addressed the question of what happens when your bylaws are silent to it.
Yes.
And we did speak to the fact that where your bylaws are silent to it, if it is a nuisance or things like that, then you are in breach of the bylaws anyway. So even if your bylaws are silent to whether or not you can operate an Airbnb, if it is that you are doing something in your unit or your strata lot that is a nuisance to your neighbors,
right,
you're breaching the bylaws, and that could be potentially operating an Airbnb.
All right. Now we've been speaking about stratas.
Yeah.
What happens in kind of non-strata communities?
Right. So again, this is something where basically we have not yet legislatively caught up to the reality on the ground.
So I have a house in a neighborhood. It is it's a completely standalone thing. But obviously I have neighbors, etc. How do we even go about this?
Okay, so we're gonna sidetrack here and say that. So what has happened is that Jamaica is currently looking at introducing gated communities or shared communities legislation.
Right.
And this is going to address the situation where you have these kind of housing developments where they are gated or not gated, but basically they are shared facilities, shared common areas that would be a part of how the development was created.
Right.
Meaning so usually how developments are created, there's one big title to a big piece of land, and then they break that title up into smaller titles via a deposited plan, and that title would say, okay, these are the lots and these are the common areas that you're sharing and maintaining together.
Right.
So that type of development is not currently governed under one piece of legislation yet.
Right.
We're looking at introducing that soon. We really, really need it, right? So I really do hope that it comes into effect soon.
All right.
But in the absence of that legislation, what has happened is developers, when they create a development, basically are the ones that kind of determine what the rules and structure
will look like
of that development looks like.
Yes.
And so we have a mixed bag right now in Jamaica. You have some communities that are basically operating with, and it was challenged in court recently where they have a little homeowners association. But this is not an incorporated association. It's not a legal body. It's just basically like a little club what they might do.
Right.
And the court has recently found where clubs like that have no formal structure, when they're trying to force owners in that community to pay maintenance towards maintenance of the common facilities, they can't, because they're not a registered and they're not a legally incorporated entity capable of suing and being sued. Right? So that's one example. And in situations like that, if there's an Airbnb in there, you can see how, because there are no rules and there's nothing binding everybody, how you're going to police that, right? Another situation that you have, which is a little bit better, is where there is an incorporated association. So as the developer at the time of incorporating would have had the foresight to incorporate a company, and that company now is charged with, and it's usually by way of guarantee, or it could be by shares. Sometimes it just depends on what their legal their lawyer
framework is.
And that company would be in charge of maintaining the common areas, and the different owners from time to time as they may be will be members of that company and pay their maintenance into that company and sign a agreement.
Right.
So backtracking to strata, why strata enforcement works so well is because by virtue of buying into a strata, you are deemed under the legislation to agree to all of the rules and bylaws governing that community.
Right.
When it's not a strata, there is nothing that says you have agreed to these things.
To be bound to that.
Correct. So that is why before a good developer, before they even allow you to buy in, requires everybody buying in
to sign an agreement,
contract, agreeing to be bound by these rules so that you can rely on contract.
Right.
So again, the contract is not always as strong as the legislation, which is ingrained in the law, but at least you have a contract to rely on and that you can use to enforce it and sue if necessary. Right? So we have that. And so when you do have a homeowners association that's protected by a homeowners agreement, and these persons have signed on and there are rules to say you're not allowed to do this thing, you can get sued under that agreement. Another situation is that developers may say, okay, when I am forming the development, I will put various covenants, which are promises not to do things, restrictive covenants on the titles in the development. And what that does is say this lot can only be used for certain things. And one of those restrictive covenants could be to use it for a private dwelling only, or to not use it for commercial or a business use.
Right. And in that they will have to be very specific that a short-term rental is going to be considered a commercial use. So if we have said you can't do that, you can't do that.
Correct. And this is, again, because of how legal this area is getting and technical, this is why it's so important to get good legal advice on it and to have good attorneys draft these clauses or these covenants or these agreements or these bylaws to make sure that they're not contravening another law. And I mean, it goes even beyond that, because at a greater planning level or zoning level, now we have to look at the fact that our various parish councils would be in charge of determining whether or not you can use particular properties for particular uses.
Yes.
Right? Because different areas have different zonings, and these would be reflected on your title. These would be reflected in different development orders and things like that. And so
you have to know what is going on.
And you do, because that will take it even beyond a gated community. You could not be in a gated community but be using a property that is in a residential area in a way that is it's not zoned for, because you're using it for a non-residential use.
Oh my.
And so even though you're not in a gated community, you still could potentially run afoul of the law. But it remains to be seen, because as I said, this is a newly evolving area in Jamaica. Airbnbs are not currently really regulated. It's something that we're struggling to catch up with from a legal perspective. So again, it's better to be safe than sorry, and you need to get proper legal advice on it.
All right. So Gabrielle, I'm hearing you say you need to get an attorney if you live in a strata to look over your bylaws to see if can I or can I not do this. Even if you don't live in a strata, can I or can I not do this? Have I signed on to something that says I can't do it? Or is it a free for all?
Yeah.
Or is it a free for all and there are no rules, everything is silent, and I can go ahead until somebody challenges or tries to stop me? Gabrielle, if you had to just wrap this up, what would you say?
I would just wrap it up again to say this is a very quickly changing area of the law, and we're going to see more changes coming, because there are even more issues than this as it relates to short-term rentals. So even things like whether or not you need to have a license to be operating short-term rentals. Are we going to see that kind of thing coming? Or is there going to be tax payable on them? Do you need to be registered to operate these things? So I'm going to say that if you are looking at doing short-term rentals as an investment and you want to buy a property to do it in, you really need to get the right legal advice.
Agreed.
And on the flip side of that, if you are living in a community or in an area where somebody is operating a short-term rental,
and you don't want them to do it,
or you don't want that in your community, you guys need to get together and get legal advice as to whether or not you actually have the framework for that community to be able to put a stop to those things. And all in all, I'm just going to say that I think we're going to see more and more where you just have to make an informed decision when you're buying and selling. Right? If you are buying into a particular development, ask these questions and understand what is the nature of this development. Not all developments are family friendly. Similarly, not all developments are vacation friendly. And so I think we will see gated communities, shared communities move in a direction of being more, okay, what am I moving here to get out of?
Correct. What am I doing?
Why am I buying this?
Why am I buying
What
this?
is my purpose?
Right.
You know? And so I think if the more owners and people who are sharing property in common have an aligned purpose, then the better we can be able to live together in harmony in these communities.
In peace and unity.
In peace and unity.
All right, Gabrielle, thank you so much. And thank you guys for joining us on another episode of Law Street. We look forward to you watching our next episode. Bye.
Bye. If you found this information helpful, you can visit our website at www.ghrlegal.com to access this information in article form, along with many other legal subjects in Jamaica. If you like this episode of Law Street, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Hit that notification bell and join us for more episodes. This show is for general discussion purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. If you would like legal advice, you should book a consultation with an attorney at law.